Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel YNR Daily Spoiler. DNA Nightmare. Jack panics over Nikki's secret.
DNA that shocks. Jack panics when Nikki tells him that their son is your father. Nikki Newman came, as she always did when trouble followed her, calm, a little tired, and with her famous honey blonde hair pinned back more carefully than it needed to be. But this time, her eyes told Jack what her voice couldn't. Despair mixed with determination. "You called me here," Jack said. His voice was more fragile than he meant it to be. Nikki's fingers tightened around the small packet she was carrying under her arm. "Yes." She put the envelope on the marble coffee table with a hint of cruelty. "We need to talk." Jack's laugh sounded like a harsh bark. "Nikki, I don't have time for riddles right now. You sound like Sharon at a PTA meeting." Nikki did not smile. "There are no riddles, Jack. This is DNA." The words hit him like a punch. The Abbott estate was quiet for a few heartbeats, except for the ticking of the mantel clock and the sound of life going on in Genoa City, as if nothing had happened. Jack quietly sat down in the armchair across from hers. "He said that we did paternity tests for 3 different men in the last 6 months. Kyle was in a coma. Victor is suing someone, and Devin, what's going on, Nikki?" She opened the envelope like a priest showing off a holy relic. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the official seal of a private Genoa City forensics lab. Jack's name was at the top as the possible biological father, as if one could be reduced to 3 words on a form. Nikki's voice sounded steady, yet tiny. "It's about Ethan." Jack's brows hopped. Ethan. The name triggered memories he didn't want to revisit. Afternoons at Crimson Lights where laughing and good intentions had once eased the edges between Nikki and him. A night years ago, when they were young and irresponsible in ways that now made both of them flinch. Ethan Newman. He tested the name out as a test. "Which Ethan?" "There's Ethan from the Foundation." "Not Newman," Nikki interrupted. "Ethan Carter." Once again, there is silence. Jack felt something inside him tighten, like a hand tightening around a buried coin. "Ethan Carter," he repeated. "The boy who keeps showing up at Chancellor Winters, appearing lost? Who has the defiant jaw?" "Yes," Nikki whispered. "The one who broke down on my doorstep last month and told me he was looking for answers about his parents." Jack's hand found the crystal glass, as if to balance. He pictured Ethan's face, angular, guarded, and uncomfortably familiar in a way that made his stomach plummet. "You took him in?" "I fixed him tea," Nikki said gently. "We talked. He told me about a missing mother and a father he never knew. I told him what I knew, which wasn't much. But he left with a commitment to conduct a DNA test. He wanted to know for himself. And you," Jack's voice cracked. "Did you complete the test?" "Without telling me." Nikki's expression tightened into something like stubborn grief. "I had it done because I couldn't tolerate seeing him wandering around without answers. I wondered if he was Victor's. Perhaps he was somebody else's. I didn't want to scare you unless it was necessary." Jack felt the room tilt. "You didn't tell me because you didn't want to upset me?" "Nikki, I could have. You could have done more than you did." The criticism was not harsh, but it hurt. Nikki's gaze fell on him, and for a brief moment, Jack saw not the woman he had loved with flashbulb intensity for decades, but the younger Nikki, who had once stood in front of a full courtroom and declared herself unbowed. "Jack, if that child's father is you, if he's our son, you should know from me, not from a stranger on a street, or worse, on the evening news." Jack's mouth moved around the word, "our," and couldn't mold it properly. There were times long ago when the prospect of raising a kid with Nikki seemed unavoidable. Other times, the chasm between them was insurmountable. The prospect that one of their sons had been nurtured in ignorance tore at him in unexpected ways. He envisaged a life that had not been lived, missed birthdays, unappreciated recitals, and a gradual deterioration of paternal presence that could never be repaired. "Show me," he murmured, calmer than he was feeling. Nikki passed the paper across the table. The DNA profile was thick with numbers and percentages, clinical and exhaustingly precise. But the conclusion was a word that sent Jack's pulse into overdrive. Paternity probability, 99.99%. Jack Abbott is biological father. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to the white area on that page. Jack saw sights, not letters. A young man's face, the echo of a laugh he used to share, a life without him. For someone whose identity had always been linked to power, to being the guy who knew and owned everything, the prospect of an unknown son felt like a betrayal. "This is impossible," Jack stated. He attempted to catch his breath. "Impossible. Nikki, that is not, we were reckless," Nikki said quietly. "We were naive and young, and we made decisions we regretted. I assumed that everything following us was a patchwork of our faults and the relationships we eventually chose. I had no idea we had left behind this consequence. I'm very sorry, Jack." The apology was modest and feeble. Jack wanted to chuck it across the room because it was inadequate, but he also wanted to gather and cuddle it because it was all they had. He felt the dread rise like heat under his ribs, not only fear of scandal, but of tenderness, of a son who lacked a father's name on his birth certificate, of the years he would never be able to regain. "What are you planning to do?" he demanded. Nikki slumped back when the chair creaked. "I already did something," she explained. "I called Ethan. He's in the coffee shop on Main. He needed answers. He sought the truth. He asked me to talk to you." Jack's breath escaped him. "Is he here?" "Now." "Yes." Nikki's fingertips landed on his. "He's waiting." They were not, of course, the only people in Genoa City capable of drama. Tears from two distinct pasts accumulated in the alley behind crimson lights. Ethan Carter sat with his hands in his jacket pockets and a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in front of him. He had the face that men admired and women misjudged, honest angles and eyes that had seen too much. He had anticipated denial, hatred, and a slew of other things that men who call themselves fathers frequently say. He hadn't anticipated Nikki Newman's offer to see Jack Abbott and hear a truth that may either be the key to belonging or another door closing. When Jack entered the cafe, the air appeared to thicken. Ethan looked up and the crowd became silent for a moment, not because of Jack's notoriety, but because something primitive flared in Ethan's eyes. Recognition. It wasn't a direct reflection of the face in images. It was more nuanced, a shoulder stance, a tenacious curve of the lip. Jack experienced the same flutter in his gut and had to sit down. Nikki said, "Ethan," as if introducing two strangers. But Ethan rose and extended his hand. "Mr. Abbott," he said. His voice sounded even. He didn't call him Jack. That basic formality contained a small citadel of etiquette that neither healed nor injured. Jack held his hand and felt the echo of moments when he had considered fatherhood in a hypothetical ledger entry of his life, things to be acquired, trophies, and heirlooms. In the presence of a potential son, every ledger line begged for attention. "You came," Ethan said. "Nikki." "You wanted me," she responded. Her eyes flickered to Jack, and there was a hint of shame in them. "I thought you should meet." Ethan's gaze moved from Nikki to Jack, measuring and cataloging. "I had a feeling," he explained, "about both of you." "It's true," Nikki confessed, folding herself into the statement. "The test says you're Jack's son." Jack felt as if he had been dumped into a chilly lake. The shock had taken his breath away and made him awkward. "It says what?" Ethan's jaw constricted. "Nikki called to tell me she had taken a test. I had my taken. When she informed me who it stated my father was, I couldn't decide whether to run or request additional tests." "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" Jack heard himself say, more pleading than questioning. Ethan's presence pushed him to confront the years he'd lost, the milestones that had been robbed due to his absence. "I didn't know if you'd want to be found," Ethan said. "I wondered if my curiosity was selfish. I assumed that people like you, rich, powerful, had no use for me." The charge hurt Jack harder than he expected. "Do people like me?" He tried to mask his emotion with a wince. "Watch your tongue, son, if..." Then he paused. "If..." The lawyer in him desired evidence and control. The man in him wanted to rise up and confess his love and make up for decades in one afternoon. Both instincts clashed. Nikki watched them with her hands clasped in her lap. "This isn't exactly a surprise, we'll adopt you moment," she admitted with a faint, bitter smile. "So many things have happened that we cannot change. But there are things we can do right now. We can try. We need to be honest." Jack's head was a storm. He imagined Ethan's life, the minor embarrassments, the successes, the evenings he'd spent on stage as both audience and critic. Why now? Jack asked softly. Why, after all this time? Why are you trying to connect? Ethan's fingers tapped against the ceramic of his cup. Because I am weary of being a mystery. I'm tired of pretending that my shape isn't lacking something. And because I want to know if I belong to someone who, he paused, appearing to hunt for a term that would not sound accusatory. Like you. Nikki responded, her voice as if she were walking on a fine line. Jack needs a choice. Tell him that you want nothing to do with him. Don't drag him along. If you truly desire him, say so and mean it. But don't hide behind your job, your past, or your fears. Jack felt his defenses crumble in the face of those begging eyes. He'd made a career out of being decisive, acquiring firms and flattening competitors. He was used to having people wait for his decision. However, the world had presented him with a decision that was not about acquisitions or power. It was about being delicate and calculating time. When he looked at Ethan, he saw a person, not a claim, a guy with the right to a name. I don't know what to do, Jack confessed, and the shock of admitting it made him sick. I keep believing that simply saying yes will solve everything, like signing a contract. It will not. I understand what it takes to be a father in theory, but I'm frightened of failing in reality. Ethan laughed quietly and sadly. We all are. He rose up, ready to leave if the talk turned into anything more than he expected. I did not come here to give you bother. I came here because I had to know. If you want to run, I understand. If you want to try, I'd appreciate a chance. Jack watched him leave and felt something unlatch inside him. Here was the son he'd never acknowledged, a man with a past and a future that could merge with Jack's if he allowed it. The fear that had overtaken him before had subsided into a seething flood of remorse and possibility. He had been a leader in a commercial environment that valued dominance. This necessitated humility. It takes courage. Back at the Abbott mansion, the phone rang before the coffee had cooled. It was Victor. You look like you swallowed a thundercloud, Victor observed when Nikki picked up. Jack could hear him along the line, each phrase like a sharpened razor. Nikki is news, Jack replied, moving back into the room and trying to keep his voice steady. Something that involves me. Victor chuckled sharply. Is this the part when you admit to an old affair, while we both pretend it's a fatal blow to the Newman Empire? No. Nikki's measured tone said what needed to be said. Victor, this isn't about you. Then tell me, Victor said. Is my son finally found, or have you and Jack decided to adopt the city? Jack almost laughed. It was a long-standing habit to use humor to bridge difficult gaps. Jack might be a father, Nikki added. Victor inhaled through his teeth, as if surprised by the words. Jack? Which Abbott snake? Victor's tone was simultaneously surprised and possessive. You too. That's going to make for a very complex Christmas, is it not? Jack felt a surge of rage come over him, not only at Victor's arrogance, but at the thought of the public turning a deeply intimate, tender revelation into gossip. This is not a joke, Victor, he explained. If a son exists and he's been searching for family, I don't want you making him a pawn in whatever vendetta you think you own. Victor remained silent long enough for Nikki to claim a little win. If this boy wants to be a part of my life, he will have to meet the terms, Victor finally replied, each sentence metered like a court ruling. But it's your mess, Nikki. Make your bed. Nikki's cheeks became white as she hung up. He's already thinking about chess, she explained. He'll try to use this. Jack's rage transformed itself into a shield. We will handle Victor later. Right now, we need to ensure that Ethan understands the facts and that the exam is reliable. I will do my own testing. Chain of custody. Independent laboratory. If this is true, we will do it right. Nikki's relief was apparent. Will you do that? Jack nodded. Because if there is one thing I am good at, it is being thorough. If this is my son, I owe him the assurance that no one is playing games. They arranged a retest. They planned for legal representation and privacy protections. However, when the procedural machinery began to fall into place, the emotional machinery within Jack refused to be smoothed out by logistics. That night, alone in his study, Jack took out a photo album he had not looked at in years. The hazy photos of him and Nikki at 20 were like relics discovered. There were visions of laughter that appeared almost strange. He reflected on the years he had been away, not only physically but also in the subtle daily ways that mold a child. Missed soccer games, unasked questions, dinners eaten without a father at the table. He reflected about Ethan, a man who had grown not in the warmth of paternal acceptance, but in its absence. The panic that had grabbed him previously resurfaced, but this time it was pierced by something obstinate and fierce. Responsibility. He might rush to the stronghold of his career and hide into familiar certainty, allowing life to pass him by in safe little steps. Alternatively, he may stand in the muddy, unsure reality and proclaim, with all of his imperfect courage, "I'm here. Tell me what I missed." When the retest results arrived after a week that felt like an eternity, they were conclusive. The independent lab, with its sterility and clinical detachment, reached the same conclusion. Chance of paternity 99.99%. There was no tampering or chain of custody issues. The facts forced Jack to acknowledge that the past has a way of imposing on itself. He called Ethan. "Are you free to speak?" Jack inquired when Ethan responded. There was a pause, followed by a sound that Jack could only understand as exhaustion mixed with hopefulness. "Yes," Ethan answered. Jack took a breath that felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice. "The tests are conclusive," he explained. "You are my son." On the other end of the queue, Ethan produced a sound that could have been both a laugh and a sob. "Okay," he said. "So what happens now?" Jack deliberated for a long time about how to respond. He considered lawyers' apologies and speeches, as well as the fact that motherhood was a succession of modest, daily decisions rather than a legal contract. "Now," he said finally, his voice trembling in a way he had only allowed himself in private, "we start from the beginning. We learn about each other. We tell each other the truths we know. We can't change the past, but we can try to create something that looks towards the future." There was a prolonged, thankful stillness. "I don't know if I'm ready for your kind of attention," Ethan acknowledged. "Perhaps I never will be, but I'd like to try." Outside the window, the Abbott house had settled into night. The city hummed, and somewhere someone laughed. Inside, two people shared apprehension like a blanket. Jack considered the costs and benefits of saying yes to something that might never be sealed with certainty. He considered a name he had not known until recently, and how that name may one day be linked to him not by a whim, but by the purposeful, daily effort of belonging. Cliffhangers and cruel timing were what made soap operas so popular. Genoa City had given Jack and Nikki a secret that refused to be kept. It had also, paradoxically, given them a second opportunity, or at least a choice. Jack's panic was genuine. It had clawed at him, leaving him breathless and raw. But in its wake, a more stable thing began to emerge. The willingness to be present, to be accountable, to allow the past inform, but not control what comes next. As morning came over the city, Jack found himself back at the bay window, the photograph album closed, and the phone with its final message in his pocket. He was a man who had spent his entire life judging success through boardrooms and balance sheets. Now he was confronted with an uncountable ledger, a ledger of what could happen between a father and a son if both of them, exceptional in their ordinariness, consented to start. Naturally, the narrative didn't end there. Victor would not take this lightly. The press would sniff it out. Old foes would circle. But in the calm before the storm, there was a tentative grace, a son willing to be known, a father eager to learn how to be. Ethan entered Jack's life like a draft under a door, startling at first, but then entirely welcome, a reminder that when confronted with honesty, even the most profound shocks can heal into something like belonging. And when Jack sat across a table later that week from the man who could finally call him Dad, he felt panic only in his mind. The present gave him a different feeling, a fragile, exhilarating hope. "This is your father," Nikki had stated once with quivering assurance. Jack was in a state of panic, frantically making excuses and expressing his fears. But as Jack looked at the man across from him, the son he had no idea he had, the panic subsided into a vow. "I'll try to deserve him," Jack said softly. Ethan's smile was small and genuine. We'll try together. And in a city addicted to scandal, one glorious chapter was sufficient.